Hi, I'm Greg Lefebvre, creator and host of the Compulsive Storyteller podcast. Welcome to another segment of Pass the Mic, where we invite talented guests, artists, writers, actors, musicians, and others to join us on the pod to tell a great story and or to chat about the art of storytelling. I'm excited to introduce today's guest, Peri Lyons. Peri started out as an intuitive to the New York art world and is presenter of Moonstruck TV and A1R Radio's highest-rated call-in show, Peri Lyons, on every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. on Moonstruck TV and on YouTube. Okay, Peri, you're on.
Hey, Greg. Thank you. So I have a couple of stories for you about, the first one is how I was sort of mugged by paranormal. And the second one is too. They're both about discovering aspects of whatever this odd gift or affliction I have is. And the first one takes place in the 80s. I was about 13, and it was very, very hot out. I grew up in a great old house, big creaky converted deaconry that was built in 1840, a little town called Valley Cottage, New York. And it was a very spooky house. There was one room in particular on the top floor, one of my three brothers, it was his room, had this big vaulted ceiling and a fireplace, and a really spooky feeling to it. It was kind of like a importunate feeling, like somebody, as soon as you walked in, somebody wanted something from you. And it was my brother, he's Capricorn. They're not like that. But the air conditioning was the best in that room. He was off at college, and it's really hot out. So I went to go sleep in that room. So there I am, snoring my 13-year-old self away. And I wake up about 3 in the morning, and there's a woman standing next to my bed, which was odd. And I knew it wasn't my mother because my mother is blonde. And this woman had very long, straight black hair parted in the middle. And my mother's kind of a tan complexion. And this woman had a very, very pale, noticeably oval face. And my mother tended to wear sort of LL Bean stuff around the house. But this woman was wearing a black and white 1845 day dress. Also, you can't see through my mother. And that's kind of a big difference because I could see through this woman, even though she was seemingly very solid. I could see the fireplace behind her. And I wasn't scared at the time, which was kind of odd. But she stood next to me, and she was looking at me, and she kept kind of communicating to me this feeling. And the feeling was, I've got something really important to tell you. And I said, what? What is it? And she said, I've got something really important to tell you. It's really sad. You have to hear it. I'm like, what? But for the next 3 to 5 minutes, even though it seemed like an hour and a half, she stood by my bed and kind of beamed this communication at me. And I kept asking her what it was, and she wouldn't answer. And then she disappeared from the ground up. Now, later in life, through various encounters, I've learned that there are various kinds of apparitions. There are poltergeists, there are sort of sentient ghosts, and then there are ghosts that are trapped in this loop of their own sadness, their own grief. And they seem to want a resolution, but it's sort of like living beings. If we get too trapped in a habit of misery, we'll just go around and around without being able to hear the answer. And I think that's what she was doing. She also communicated this profound grief to me. And I was a 13-year-old suburban kid, perfectly nice upbringing. I didn't have anything to be sad about at the time. But I started to feel on a cellular level this welling up of a grief I'd never experienced before nor understood. So when she left, it was like the grief plug had been pulled. I suddenly felt better. Although I was suddenly really scared. So I went downstairs, went to the kitchen, and poured myself some grape juice and ginger ale, which you should try sometime, and had some Malamars, which are a sovereign remedy for all ills. And I was plowing through these and kind of get my nervous system back in order. And my mother came downstairs. Now, my mother was a really interesting woman. She was intellectual. She was a history professor at Columbia and Wellesley and places like that. And she was also from an old New England family. And it's interesting because I learned later, I didn't know then, that her great grandfather, a guy named Cotton Mather, was one of the original judges of the Salem witch trial. But he left after 2 days saying, "You guys are bonkers. I'm not having anything to do with that. Sawed off." But he was also the first bestseller in America. It was a book called Wonders of the Invisible World. And like a closeted gay guy who is a homophobe because he's terrified of his own, queerness, old Cotton Mather was absolutely fascinated with and obviously had a talent for seeing the unseen world. But his writings were all about denying that. But it was such an interesting conflict. If you read the book, you'll see. Anyways, anything supernatural was kind of like garlic to a vampire. Didn't like it. So she said, "Darling, there's no such thing as ghosts." I said, "Mom, I just saw her." And she said, "Darling, haven't you read Julian Jaynes' Origins of Consciousness and the breakdown of the bicameral mind?" And I said, "Mom, I'm 14. Okay, 14. And she said, "All right, darling. Well, I can prove you didn't see her." And I said, "How, Mom?" She said, "Well, was she about 5 feet tall?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Did she have long black hair parted in the middle?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Was she wearing an 1845 black and white day dress?" I said, "Yeah." "And did she have an oval, very pale face?" I'm like, "Yes, Mother, she did." And she said, "Darling, she doesn't exist. I've walked through her 3 times on the second floor." I'm like, "Wait a minute, Mom. You have this too?" She said, "I don't know what you're talking about." that was that. And that's why to this day, I'm still a little conflicted about what I do. Anyway, that's my first story. The second story is about how I first started to see what I'll call the non-breathing class. And I had sort of conversations with them before, not my idea, but I'd never seen them. So there was an evening. It was Lower Manhattan on Eldridge Street, what used to be Chinatown. And my then husband, who was an artist, had a wonderful studio. I used to host parties there. And one night, he brought over his friend. We'll call him Jake. And he and Jake were new friends. I didn't know anything about Jake. I was supposed to have a bunch of girlfriends come over. But here's the thing. It was a really unusual day. I actually have never seen a day or night like this, weather-wise, ever. But that day and night, there was like a 20-hour lightning storm. Sometimes it rained, sometimes it didn't. But the lightning, this constant, like, zigzag flashing forks between the sky and the ground, went on constantly. I started to think that electricity and that change had something to do with what happened next. Anyway, my girlfriends weren't there. And Jake was really nice. He had brought a lot of wine, and he brought me a deck of tarot cards because he knew I'd been sort of studying that. And he and my husband were talking, and I was kind of playing with the tarot cards. And I looked up, and there was somebody standing next to Jake. I said, "Jake, there's somebody standing next to you." He said, "I know, Per. That's your husband." I'm like, No, not him. This person is, well, it was hard to describe because she wasn't solid. It was more like a color slide projected onto moving water. And she kept telling me stuff. I said, "Okay, well, Jake, she says her name is Sarah. She was your grandmother. She looks a little like Leonid Brezhnev in a wig. Sorry, but she's also wearing a Peter Pan collared house dress. And she's holding a like a blue enamel pan with kind of a puffy kind of challah-like cake or bread in it." And he said, "Oh my God, that's my grandmother Sarah." And I said, oh, wait, one more thing. She's saying her birthday is either March 13th or 15th. And he said, yeah. He said, that was what she looked like. She always used to wear a Peter Pan collared house dress. When she knew I was coming over, she'd bake me this great sort of challah-like cake bread in a blue enamel pan. And we didn't know her birthday because it was either the 13th or the 15th, but the shtetl had burned down with a birth certificate in it. So we always celebrated on the day between March 14th. And I said, oh, okay. And then suddenly everyone else appeared. And I said, Jake, do you mind if I go on? He's like, what's going on? I said, there are other people here. He's like, sure, let me know. So I said, there's a guy standing next to you. He's wearing a three-piece suit, kind of formal. He's wearing a Homburg hat. He says he took you to the corner every Sunday morning to get the papers with the comics and funny papers, and to get an egg cream. He said, yep. And I said, and he's holding a pinochle hand? Is that a card game? Alan said, yeah, that's my dad. That's how he dressed. And he would walk me to the corner to get the funny papers and an egg cream on Sundays, and he died playing pinochle. I'm like, okay, there's more. It's like, I'm not surprised. I said, behind you, there's a really handsome, very charismatic American Indian, and he's lying in kind of one of those long deck chairs, you know, the sort of plastic strips that they had in the 70s. He's like, yep. And he's a really good-looking guy, and he's holding a beer in one hand, a cigarette in the other, and there's a beautiful woman standing behind him, and she's Native American too, I think Navajo, saying something about turtles. He's like, yeah, I'll tell you in a minute. I said, okay, well, she's got her hands on both of his shoulders, standing behind him. She's weeping, and she is now putting a hand up to her heart to say that her heart is broken, and I think she died of something heart-related. And Alan said, those are my parents. I said, well, I thought your dad was the guy playing pinochle. He said, when I was 18, I knew I was adopted, but I found the records. And it turns out that my birth parents were Navajo Indians. They had come to New York to work on the Brooklyn Bridge, or they were children of those, I don't know which. But they're Navajo, and turtle tribe. I'm like, that explains the turtles. He said, but I was adopted into an Orthodox Jewish family. And I said, okay, well, so we both kind of stopped for a minute, and Alan and I kind of held hands and then hugged, and he said, thank you for that. It means a lot to me to know they're still with me. And I said, you're welcome. I think my life just changed. And he said, yeah, well, I know mine just did. And that was that. He actually left fairly soon after, braving the elements, because it's got to be a little it's not a social situation anybody really has a template for. It's like, oh, you just saw my dead relatives. Have a canapé. So he left. Lovely guy, great artist, and I will always be grateful for him, because I think something about both his American Indian ancestry and the lightning storm conspired to make me be able to see those people now as I do consistently. And those are my stories. Greg, I hope you like them.
Oh, very much so. Two amazing stories, Peri. I'm bowled over. And
thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on Pass the Mic. It's been a real treat.
For me too. And
okay.
You. Anything for you, Greg.
Great.
Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Are you ready to tell your own story on The Compulsive Storyteller? We're launching a new segment of guest storytelling, and we want to hear your stories. Email a voice recording to hello@thecompulsivestoryteller.com. I'll play selected stories on upcoming episodes. Try to be as clear as possible in your recording, and we reserve the right to lightly edit them for length and clarity. Leave your name or contact information in your voicemail or email, and let us know if you'd like the story to be anonymous. I can't wait to hear from you. The Compulsive Storyteller is now co-produced by Greg Lefebvre and Fadia Montserrat, who's also arranged the music and created the special effects. Emily Ramon does design, research, editing, and marketing. Peter Kokoma has made our theme music and for many seasons co-produced the show with me. If you enjoyed this week's episode, let us know. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook at The Compulsive Storyteller, and we'd love to hear from you. This podcast is independently produced, so we really appreciate all your help and support. Share the show with your friends, subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and please leave a review. You can also check out our website, thecompulsivestoryteller.com, for more information. Thanks for listening, and if you didn't like this one, the next one will be another story. All characters and events portrayed in this podcast are based on my truth, with some names and facts changed for privacy. The conversations and dialogues are based on my best memory, but are not word-for-word recreations.